Hello, everyone, and welcome to Making Sense of Modern Times. This is The Conversation. I think when I created this platform, what I really wanted to do was have a place where we can explore different ideas of how to navigate what I think is an ever-changing world. I'm fascinated by these tensions that exist in modern life, the fact that we're more connected than ever, but we're lonelier than ever. The fact that, people have never been so connected in one world or further apart. We've never been more able to be healthier unless we have, and we at the time when we have chronic disease rising. It's never been easier to start a business. It's never been harder to stand out as a business. We've never had so much information. We've never had such small attention spans. So I feel like these tensions just make for a really fascinating modern world. And so what this platform is about is monthly I share ideas on this in writing. And now I want to start to have conversations about these with other people who I think are owning and are putting forward points of view in the world that I find fascinating, that I find exciting, that I want to talk to. And one of those is an idea of business. Many of you will know that I've started my entrepreneurial journey this year. And really what the world of business has made me realize is how much it's dramatically changed over the past 100 years. Just the sheer shift from an industrial revolution to an AI revolution means the standard ways of operating are just changing so quickly. And I think when we're looking at this changing world of business and the people that I think will help us navigate this or who have really interesting nourishment or food for thoughts, I think of Rowan. And so Rowan is many things, but I will try and sum up as he's an entrepreneur. He's the founder of Lockstep, and he's an executive advisor who really helps fix underperforming companies as well as helping companies get towards this idea of a business soul. I'm going to let Rowan talk a little bit more about that because it's a new idea for me, but it's one that when he told me about, I couldn't unhear. And that for me is the mark of a powerful idea. Working in advertising, I would hear 100 ideas a day. But the ideas you can't unhear are the ones that really do make their mark. Rowan and I, our paths crossed when I was MD at MNC, and he coached me for a period of that time where he introduced me to many groundbreaking ideas. So I'd like to welcome Rowan. Rowan, welcome to the conversation. It was a longer intro than I thought, but this is what happens when you and I get into a virtual room.
It's the truth, yeah. Thank you for having me. I was thinking about this platform as being a real act of service and leadership. So I just want to sort of commend you on that. What my observation about living in this world these days is that if it's taken as a body of work over decades, over a lifetime, it's a really hard thing to get right nowadays. Yeah. It used to be easier. It's really hard now. And I think platforms like this that aren't prescriptive about one way or the other, but just provide a space and a forum for idea exchange, even at a minimum, is so valuable. So I think you're a perfect man for this job. And I just, as I say, wanted to honor the leadership that you're showing in your life.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot. So, Rowan, I think I'd love to get into the heart of it because I think there's so much that you have to share. And I think for those listening who want to follow more about what Rowan does, do go to his LinkedIn and sign up for his newsletter as well. A lot of amazing thinking happens there. So if I were to ask you to kick us off with where is business at in the world today? When you think of business, maybe in a sentence, having worked with so many organizations, what's the state of business in the world right now?
Healing, I would say. Business has done really well for 125 years. We've got a lot to thank it for. It's created a huge amount. It advanced us a huge distance. But there was a lot of collateral damage along the way. Planetary, human, loss of wealth, all kinds of things have happened that now can be avoided. And I think business is now starting to find a higher voice in society, which I'm excited about, because if you look at the global institution of business, it probably has more of the resources and more of the talent than any other institution out there. And
True.
so we must ask a lot of business right now. And I think business is starting to respond to that ask, but there are a lot of very deep-seated patterns that need to be ripped out and recast. And that is the healing process that's going on. And I don't mean healing in a soft way. I just mean healing is in a way of becoming whole. You know, everything, every person, everything in nature is always trying to become whole. Businesses are trying to become whole too, but there are some barriers that they need to fight through of old thinking, old ideas, old ways of doing things. But it is absolutely happening, and in the last 25 years, it's happening at quite an increased rate. So I sit here today being very, very optimistic about the role business might be playing in society 25 years from now.
Oof, it's such a powerful way of thinking about it. And I wonder how often leaders take that step back to be in that level of awareness or consciousness around how whole their business is, and whether they're doing that, or whether they are just so in the thrust of the day-to-day and the operating that you're not getting that step back. Is that something that you've seen with people you're working with?
Yeah, seen, noted, bothered by, because, you know, from my vantage point as a practitioner, what I see in very simple terms is an array of modern new ways that are available. Yet, 8 out of 10 CEOs don't know about them, don't access them, and it's a confounding thing for me. It's like being seated at a dinner table with a beautiful meal in front of you, but limiting yourself to the bread rolls. And
Yeah.
you know, it's just, it doesn't make any sense, but yet it's happening at scale. So then someone like me, being frustrated is not helpful. So, you know, I'm starting to think of, not starting, I'm permanently thinking of why this is the case and what is the way around to bring CEOs of the world into this new territory where so much is on the table, but yet it seems to be not ignored, but maybe just put at the periphery instead of at the center.
Yeah, super powerful. So I want to get into this idea of business soul. It's something that you and I have discussed in your very early stages when this idea was making its way through you, as I think ideas do. And I've seen it kind of unfold online ever since. But if we could just take a step back and for those listening, just land in a simple way, what is this idea of business soul? And how does it link to this concept you've spoken about now around businesses needing to heal and be whole? How do these things interplay?
I'll start with an anecdote, if I may. Last week, I did an offsite with the leadership team, and they'd never thought about business soul before. They'd never even thought about the fact that their business was a sentient being that exists, has always existed, has quietly been the vessel or the vehicle that has provided them with many things, wealth, aspiration, ambition, and it's just been sitting there in the quiet. And I named this. I said, you know, outside that door, this business is looking at you, and it's observing you, and it's witnessing you. And if you are going to lead this business well, you can either impose your ideas on it, or you can take a read from it and be guided as to what this business needs to become the best version of itself, whole or high performing, or whatever language you want to use.
Yeah.
And for him, this changed the conversation completely. They named it, they gave it a gender. So it was Princess, I won't mention the company's name.
Yeah.
And then everything changed because there was this recognition that the sentient being was there. Now, that is the underpinning of why I like to use soul. Because firstly, everybody knows soul. It's not a word that needs explaining. Everyone's got differing definitions of it. But everyone knows soul because they can feel it. They felt sacred in their lives at some point before. And so when one opens up this portal of seeing a business as not an organogram, not a dull gray arrangement of people behind laptops trying to get output, once they go down this different path, then all of these things open up. And I don't open up soul because it feels nice. It happens to feel nice, and I think that's wonderful. But I open up soul because that is the way to get into the deepest potentiality of a business. It is the DNA or the Rosetta Stone of everything a business wants, needs, requires, does not need, you name it. That's where you get your answer. So if a CEO or a senior leader, or any leader for that matter, can change their stance, and we can talk about stance more because it's a very, very important part of leadership and business performance. But if they can change their stance from the gray to the technicolor, then suddenly all of this stuff in business is on the table and everything's to play for. And then they become the 2 out of the 10 CEOs out there who actually have sort of seen the light and have a whole array of tools to use that were previously not available.
Yeah. There's so many places I want to go, but the place that I was first drawn to, which I think has a lot of parallels, is a lot of the conversations I would have with CEOs around their brand. And making this shift and the journey from seeing your business as a collection of products, services, and people to something that is actually a brand that plays a role in the world. And that's why you've seen this growth and this birth of brand purpose, because this is about stepping back and saying, what is it at its core that this idea does in the world for people, for society, for legacy, all these things. And you see that coming up authentically in some businesses, and you see it coming up in a trite way. If I look at, for example, Airbnb, their business fundamentally changed when they embraced this idea of their purpose in the world is to help people belong anywhere. A big idea, a powerful idea versus make rooms available faster and cheaper. They understood this much bigger thing. And then everything started revolving around kind of this purpose. So it takes me into a lot of common ground between helping people really define what their brand is and what their soul is. And for me, when I was most lit up by that type of work, it was in moments, in workshops like yourself, where a CEO would say things. One that stays with me was, by helping us understand what we do, you've helped us discover who we truly are. And it's those kind of conversations that then you see an organization take a whole nother trajectory because they've got this vision ahead now. Is that kind of what you see happening as well?
Yeah, it's exactly what I see happening. I say a prayer every night with my children. They alternate. Sometimes I do it, and it's a pretty normal prayer. It's what we're grateful for, and blah blah blah. But what happens when that prayer is spoken is that everything around the 3 of us feels more dense, more special, more intelligent, more attractive, more real, more authentic. When the tapestry of something changes like that, then the ideas that are birthed in that room by those people are of an entirely different level of quality. And so what you are describing there is a mechanical expression of brand, or a sacred expression of brand, whereby it's actually giving voice to a soul. That's what the brand is, it expressed in that way. And so all through business, we have a choice, minute by minute, meeting by meeting, output by output, whether we want to do this with a sense of sacredness and soul, or whether we want to do it in a dry, brittle, hollow, callous way. And there is middle ground. I'm not a zealot about this. But what people don't realize is that the opportunities for bringing soul and sacredness to a business, thereby enhancing your performance, are myriad and endless.
Yeah.
And so, to start a meeting, a simple thing, start a meeting with a gratitude, like my kids, like our prayer, everything will change for the duration of that meeting. The humans that are around the table are bigger, better humans.
Yeah.
And so that's my business case for Soul. It's not like soul.org, it's soul.com.
Yeah.
And I think the distinction is really important. It just requires a leader of a certain, I guess, level of wholesomeness and healedness,
Yeah.
to be open to this stuff so that they can bring it into their business. And I think that's really the journey for particularly CEOs now, is just to make sure that their soul is whole so that their business's soul can be whole.
Yeah. 100%. It feels to me like there's a number of ideas that or spaces in what I'd call the modern kind of human experience or our modern world now that are starting to knock at the door. And the way they knock at the door is through the downstream consequences of not paying attention to them.
True.
So I'm looking at the moment a lot with True Nature at the health consequences of us having abandoned basically the fundamental pillars of life: what we eat, how we move, how we choose to rest and recharge, how we manage our minds, and connection to ourselves and others. Those 5 things are actually what our true nature is. And that's why we name the business True Nature. It's about helping people get back in line with the most natural experience. And it feels to me like this, you're seeing the exact same pattern, but through the lens of business, which is businesses have a truth to them, a soul to them. And this is about letting that thing express itself. Is that correct?
Yes, that's entirely correct. Just to substantiate your point, businesses change for one of 2 reasons: pain or ambition. Generally, it's pain. Now and again, a big idea births that's got huge scaling properties, and that's ambition driven. But most of the businesses out there, the rank and file businesses, change because they are feeling pain. And I see pain in businesses all the time. It can be pain from inefficiency, pain from a lack of connection, pain from a poor strategy, pain from not understanding where business and society are overlapping. There's lots of possibilities for pain, unfortunately. But the role then of the CEO and the executive leader is to understand the ecosystem, the total ecosystem of society, and to work within that in a way that lets you advance yourself naturally. We only suffer pain as businesses when we are blind to our surroundings. When we are alive and alert to what's happening in society, and we have set our business up to be in harmony with society, then we get an organic, natural flow to our businesses. Success comes more easily. But when we set ourselves up against society and we are flowing against the natural order, then we are setting ourselves up for a lot of struggle. And it's like a sprinter who's getting out of the starting blocks at the Olympics with one set of spikes caught in the starting blocks. Like, that's how it feels to me. And there's a lot of effort trying to get out there. But it takes time, and the start is slow, and the momentum's slow, and the field ahead of you have completed the race by the time you're at the 50-meter mark. And that's what it feels like for a lot of businesses.
Yeah. So say I'm listening to this conversation and we've got someone's interest. They're going, wow, this is like a dimension shifting idea for me as an entrepreneur or as a corporate leader. Where does one even start? Is a business soul something that already exists? Is it something that you need to make conscious? Where do I start to even begin this journey of getting in touch with or removing things out of the way of my business's soul?
Yeah, there is a quote that says, "Change is but a decision away," and I do believe that to be the case. You can have profound change very fast with the right conditions. I was on a podcast 2 weeks ago with a wonderful man by the name of John Sinai.
Yeah.
And he had this experience live on the podcast. He suddenly had this realization that in the quiet, his business has been serving him faithfully, but being neglected for, north of 10 years now. And he had a tearful, visceral response of regret around this neglect. And I don't think he'd mind me saying this because it's out in the public domain.
Yeah, I watched it.
Yeah, so that's what can happen for him. Is it can suddenly be an entire avenue that opens for you if it is right for you right now. For some people, it's not right, and I accept that. That's totally cool in my world. But if you are drawn to this, if you feel it makes sense, if it resonates with you, open up that portal and go down that road because it is calling you. This new way of being, and this is the stance, right? A stance, a leadership stance is a worldview. I see businesses having these possibilities and these impossibilities. That's a stance.
Yeah.
And that opens or closes things to you. So if your stance is opening and if you feel pregnant with possibility around what a new version of you could be, what a new version of your business could be, just go down the path. Call me. I'll be happy to talk to anyone about this in an informal way as a sort of an active service to the business community around where to take it. But there are avenues out there. And the thing that I would encourage anyone to do right off the bat is just start this connection with your business soul. Talk to it, tune into it. There's a leadership technique I use these days that I teach a lot called attunement. And that basically is the tuning in to the business soul and letting it give you messages and readings about what your business needs. That is how to start. What you'll find is if you'll open up, or if your listeners open up to that, this world will come to them in a very organic way. The readings, the thought leaders, the books, they're all out there. Not a lot of them, but they are out there. But as I say, if anyone's curious, I'd be happy to spend an hour on a call with them just talking through this topic.
Amazing. That's very generous of you and very powerful. Something that I've been thinking about as you're talking is I think there's kind of a coming together of what at the moment is seen as spirituality and the world where healing and whole and trauma and all these things exist. And then there's kind of been the cold, hard, rational world, which is about reason, logic, data, science, etc. And what I'm most excited about now, as someone that enjoys both modes and lives according to both modes, is they're no longer for me in disparate worlds. They are clashing together. And for me, the science is catching up with the spirituality versus the opposite. But you have guys like Dr. Joe Dispenza and others who are really doing remarkable work in measuring the impact of frequency and proving the fact that our thoughts bend reality versus the other way around. And one of the ideas introduced there is this idea of us being channels for like a higher purpose, a higher energy, a higher vibration. The fact that as human beings, we limit everything to what we can understand. But even on this planet, there are things we can't see, there are things we can't hear. In fact, John spoke about this in his on his Instagram this last week. And for me, this idea of business soul reminded me of this concept of channeling, which is whatever you believe in a spiritual realm. There's this idea that we as people are vehicles through which ideas express themselves. I certainly feel that way with the business that we are working on, and that an idea whose time has come will find a way to express itself in the world. Whether that idea has come because of a certain tension between society, between culture, business, whatever, it creates these intangible frictions that then need to express themselves. And many great businesses are the execution of that pull. So what I wanted to ask you was, do you think that business souls already exist, or are they created by the business leader?
No, they exist. They're there. They've always been there. But our lens has been too narrow. So a colleague of mine, Rocco Jarman, Roccojarman, wonderful man to follow. He coined this term double-minded, which means one is able to work with both the logic and the magic of the world, the logos and the mythos in Greek terms. And the logos is the rationale, the grit, very, very important. The mythos is the ability to relate to story, to mythology, to meaning, you know. And when those two things dance together, that is really the true nature of how to succeed in the world we live in. So the souls have been there. I mean, how could they not, right? We all have souls, and it's just an aggregation of souls in a business that come together in a single entity that we can relate to. So of course they've been there. We just haven't been able to see them. But I think it's important to note that, you know, soul isn't ethereal, meaning, source, divinity, like all they refer to at the end of the day, in my opinion, is that all of us humans just have a higher form or a lower form of ourselves. It's not something in the ether.
Yeah.
It's just that it's us. And we either choose to evoke that part of ourselves in life, in business, or we choose not to. And the same applies to business as it applies to how we show up in our marriages, or as parents, or in our communities, or in our sports teams. We have a higher and a lower version of ourselves. We can choose it. And when we choose the higher version, the business that we're a part of elevates itself automatically because of doing so. That's what is exciting to me. The thing about soul is that it's not ethereal and peripheral. It's actually a very normal thing when we think about it in practical terms. And soul, for me, or divinity, or source, or sacredness, any of those words, they are just referring to the fact that every human being has a higher form or a lower form of ourselves. And we can choose which form to bring into which environments. And in the past, the business environment has largely, with exceptions, largely encouraged the lowest form of ourselves. Come into work, sit behind your laptop, bang away some emails, 9 to 5, go home, feeling depleted, and do the same thing the next day. That's just not a higher form of ourselves. But you know, when businesses like Zappos 20 years ago started to change the rules, then suddenly it allowed for the higher version of ourselves to come into play. And that is the momentum that we're seeing in businesses now. That's, you know, if you take a Netflix, who also have made some of their own rules, that's really just because they permitted themselves to be different and a higher version of what business had been in the past. So how it manifests can be infinite, but what is germane to every business that has elevated itself is that the humans have found a higher form of themselves.
Yeah. And Rowan, tell me, as you've started to introduce this idea, I know that you have a partner that you've a sparring partner on this topic that you're doing a retreat with kind of soon for business executives. But as you explored this idea, have you found that it exists in the business world, in the community? Are other people talking about this, or are you kind of championing a new idea?
Faheem, I'm happy to say that I'm fairly singular in this. I do have co-collaborators, Ellie Silent being one, and my colleagues in lockstep being others. But this is not really in the public domain right now. You know, that's a tricky position for me because it makes me very pioneering, and to be overly pioneering is hard. But I believe so deeply in this that I'm happy to be going roughly solo on this now, because, you know, it gives me something to talk about that other people can't. And you know, in the competitive commercial position that I'm in, that's a cool thing. But but I'm certainly very generous about it. And what the retreat is in the UK in November is just actually teaching CEOs how to attune. It's all about attunement and the messages they can get from their businesses and how they operationalize that into a higher performing structure. So, yeah, I feel very bravely solo, but happily solo right now.
I think what's amazing is there are, in my view, there are always ideas whose time have come. And I think what you talk about, I think the time has come, and one will both lead the conversation, and I think also society is going to push people towards a state where this kind of thing resonates and hooks more and more, I believe. We've seen this in every generation, like ideas come and go, but just bringing an overall level of more consciousness to the way we go about our existence, whether it's through our business and our relationships, our health, I think that's coming in a big wave. And the reason it's coming is because the symptomatic problems of not being conscious about these things are growing at a rapid rate. And so at some point, the knock becomes so loud, you have to answer.
100%, Faheem. That's a great insight. And it was illustrated by the when people came back to work post-COVID, or when they got a break from their businesses post-COVID, really what happened is they saw their work experience in a clear light, and it was not appealing.
Yeah.
And so they then had agency to say, well, I'm not going to come back 5 days a week. And they had agency to say, actually, leaders of the business I'm a part of, I require a better work experience.
Yeah.
Like, this is just not fulfilling. So, you know, it is a higher level of consciousness, but actually it's more simple than that.
Yeah.
It's a question of being fulfilled. It's a question of having some enjoyment out of this thing called work. It's a question of stringing together a career that actually is purposeful at the end of the day. And, you know, these are very real, practical things. It's rooted in consciousness. But I think people like you and I, we should be cautious about using those type of terms, because it takes it away from many people who've never even heard of the word conscious before.
Yeah.
And really, you know, I'm looking across at a cafe that has 3 employees. I want that cafe to be as open to new ideas about existing as a business as General Electric is.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that's really where most of the people in the world work. They work in small businesses that aren't privy to this sort of stuff, and they're the ones that I feel most empathetic about.
For sure. Yeah, I think there's a big job in translating some of these concepts that at first take feel like they live in the world of being a bit too ethereal. And I find the most useful way of doing that is by offering really practical ways that it applies to life. So what I do in the monthly newsletter is I always write a framework that you can use as a reader to apply the idea of the month to your life. And I think that bridge is really important, that isn't built enough. So people either connect with the ethereal, or it's super down and dirty in the application, and it's not bridging these two worlds. And that's how I feel about even health or whole health. And what we're doing with True Nature is the fact that a lot of people go, oh, that's for the healthy people. No. It's actually, how do we get people to live in line with their actual selves? Like all this, the modern world, what it's doing to us in terms of dopamine and all of this, means that we actually often don't actually know what it's like to be our actual selves. That's what COVID did. It just put a little pause, and you're like, whoa. Like, what's going on here? It's the same thing. I saw Jay Shetty talking about yesterday, going, would you allow 100 people to walk into your bedroom while you're still in bed in the morning? No, you wouldn't. So why do you let them do that into your mind every morning when you wake up and you scroll from one context into the next? And it's these kind of ideas that I think will stick, because they take something conceptual and they make them really practical.
Yeah, that's so true. I am many years ago, I was fortunate enough to have an archetype revealed to me about who I am and how my work takes place. And that archetype is the archetype of the shepherd. The shepherd is a protector, but also sort of in my world, an interpreter. So, you know, I can read a book on trauma, it's a pretty heavy read, right?
Yeah.
I just need to take 3 ideas out of that book, translate them for my CEO clients, and make them useful. And so I think there's something about doing this work wearing a metaphorical light cloak. You know,
Yeah.
if it's too heavy, it's not appealing. If it's unjoyful, it's not motivational. So I think for the shepherds and the interpreters of the world, we have to work on our craft to make sure that we are positioning ideas in the right way, with the right language, so that people hook into them.
Yeah.
We don't want to be alone, but right.
No.
I want to be followed, and I want to change people and be right.
Yeah.
And so I think that dance is really important. And I think it's something you do particularly well. You know, you've got a shininess about your work that does make it compelling.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's something I've really realized this year is the importance of storytelling and communication to be able to get across these concepts. And you add to that the world that we live in and algorithms and a volume of information. And for me, it's almost a non-negotiable these days that if you have an idea to communicate, that you find the simplest version and way of doing that.
Can I add one anecdote to that?
Yeah.
The political realm is really interesting, right?
Yes.
Because they can find a word that works. And they have, you know, in the US elections, many 2 elections ago, when Trump called Jeb Bush low energy, his campaign literally ended in that moment.
Yeah.
And then when someone has come up with this word weird, used to describe ex-President Trump, that is also stuck.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a knack. There's a knack to this stuff. I don't know if I like the way those words are being used because they feel a bit labeling.
Sure.
But in our world, you know, like I've come up with this term sacred success because it is the balance of all the good parts of success with all the depths of sacredness. And when they dance together, that is something that's really powerful. And with my clients now, they don't need it explained to them. They don't need soul explained to them because it's such a good, well understood, related to word. And I think that there's a learning for us and for leaders out there. So if we're trying to make change, language, stories, anecdotes, that's the avenue, not intellectual models. That's the underpinning, but not the conduit.
You know what I think one of the biggest challenges we have is whether you're talking about, you know, what I want to champion, which is health, and what you're championing in terms of business soul, they all, for me, feel like the fundamentals. They are our base layer through which everything else, you know, it's our contact lens. It's the thing through which then shapes it. But it's seen as separate. And I feel like the job is to take it from separate into aligned. And the way in which we do that might have to be through putting the purest form of the concept secondary to the thing that is most easily interpreted. Let me try and simplify that, which is if fundamentally what CEOs are most interested in is performance or efficiency or building a brilliant culture or whatever, what role do things like soul or whole health play in that? And then you get permission to the party. And then from there, one can deepen and broaden and stretch.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think really all that is being empathetic to the audience, right?
Yeah.
Nobody likes a zealot. Zealots are easily dismissed because they are too hyped up on their own adrenaline.
Yeah.
To meet, you know, if we take this term or the concept of consciousness, one has to be very careful about that because it can evoke all kinds of religious blockers that really don't help it. I just think to be sensitive and almost have a sense of humor about our work. You know, you and I take our work very seriously. It's like part of our identity.
Yeah.
But if we go over a certain line of intensity, we just become a little bit over the top.
Yeah.
And so, I'm very cautious about that. I'm very aware of where my audience is. And that's why, as a shepherd, I need to get my language really right so that people don't go X to that one.
Yeah. I love that. And something Asma and I have been talking about recently is how do we bring more joy into the process of building the startup? So for us, this startup is really about purpose. It's about what we think we are supposed to be building in the world based on our skills and our experiences. But also in that journey, it can become quite serious. We have to make the right decisions at the right time. Who do we need to meet? Who do we need to network with? What's the right strategy for this? What's the right strategy for that? And none of those are wrong questions, but they're all fundamentally raised when you approach them with joy. How does one do that? How do we bring this positive, fun, light touch to this topic of business soul and bringing those two things? How do we do this?
Yeah. Two ideas that work together. One is structure and one is story. So let's deal with the easy one, structure. If you are working 23 hours a day in a basement with poor equipment, not bothering about things like your culture, how you treat your customer, I mean, you're never going to get joy out of that, right?
Yeah.
But that's actually the secondary part. The first part is the story. Any environment, any scenario goes through our lens of story. And when I say story, I don't mean the story in its literal form. I mean the narrative.
Yeah.
So if you say, my startup journey is going to be a blessed journey, it is going to have hardship, but I am fulfilling my greatest potential. I've made a powerful choice. I've done excellent research. I've really doubled down on my strategy. I'm going to enjoy this journey, come what may. That's the story. That's a narrative, right? The other narrative could be, oh, this is going to be hard. I hope I can make it.
Yeah.
I'm terrified that none of my investors are going to come to me and support me in the long term. I think I might fail. What if I fail? My reputation's shot. If that's your story, then you're going to be the guy in the basement with that structure.
Yeah.
But if the story is the former story, you're going to bring craft and care and attention to the thing that you build. And it's going to have a comfortable chair to sit in and a nice laptop and a good microphone for doing podcasts and generosity of spirit in offering other competing products a helping hand, Suddenly there is a richness in the lived experience. And so it is all about story. In fact, most things for him are about story. Marriage is about story. Parenting is about story. Health is about story. Worldview is about story. So I would pay massively close attention to story because it is the opening or the closing of a lot of opportunities.
Amazing. So powerful. I feel like there are many subsects of this conversation that we're going to need to get into, and I think we'll do that. But maybe for this conversation, I think what I really wanted to do was capture the concept of business soul, which I think we've really looked at from different angles, offer people a couple of ideas of how you can start to think about this. So I love structure and story as a way to do that, as well as your generous offer of engaging with people. Maybe to kind of wrap for today, what is the one closing thing that you'd want business leaders, whether entrepreneurial or corporate, to kind of leave this conversation with, thinking about? Or maybe if there's something that you feel you haven't voiced yet because of the way the convo's flowed, feel free to do that now.
Yeah, thank you. I want all business leaders to take the cap off their expectations that might have been suppressed for years or decades about what business can be, what an experience of work can be. it feels to me like there's this metaphoric pushing down of these ideas, which is the cap that I speak on.
Right.
And if, on my gravestone, I would love people to be able to say, he blew the cap off what people thought business could be.
Yeah.
And I really, really want that for people, because the knock-on effect is vast. Wealth creation, health, spiritual fulfillment, impact into community,
Yeah.
Quality of parenting. These really natural things, parenting's come up 3 times in this conversation. This is the gift of business. It is not just about being a good business person. It's about being a good citizen of the world. But there is no better environment to learn those skills, to build those capabilities than business. Business is this platform, this golden, juicy, benevolent platform from which to build an incredible life. And I wish people saw it for that.
Amazing, inspiring as always, and super, super, super powerful. I want to say a big thank you for your time, Rowan, for sharing your ideas, for championing, for pioneering. Pioneering can be a lonely state and a place, but I want to give you all the encouragement that you deserve, because I think you are bringing together worlds that no one has done before. And I think you are the right person to do that. So I look forward to lots more convos like this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And also to note that I felt the presence of soul and sacredness in this conversation. It's not a complicated thing. It's just it's a tone we had because we're trying to do something that we think is good for the world and which we're both passionate about.
Yeah.
That's what soul is. It's no more complicated than that. So I felt the presence of that today, and I really appreciate the platform. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.